Hello, I'm Andy Mock with CATS. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the LYNX Silverline project. And tonight we're here to give a presentation on our preliminary staff recommendations for Focus Area 3, which is in Center City. We've already done two focus area presentations, one in Focus Area 1, which is in the town of Belmont to I-485, and then Focus Area 2 was from I-485 to Summit Avenue near Center City. But tonight we want to give an update of our preliminary staff recommendations for Center City. So just as a note for participants, we do have a panel of technical experts who will be assisting on some of the live Q&A after the presentation. So as a note to the panelists, please remain on mute until the Q&A portion of the meeting. For participants, please log into your Gmail or YouTube account to participate in the live Q&A. For best quality streaming, log off any organizational VPNs. Post questions in the chat box to be answered at the end of the meeting. Thank you. So real simple and straightforward agenda. We're here to give you a project overview with alignment refinement recommendations. Really kind of show what we've been working on over the last year, and also show what we intend, what we're asking for public feedback on, which we will then take forward to the Metropolitan Transit Commission later on this spring. And then we'll do a live question and answer. So the team that's putting forward the Silverline project is led by myself, Andy Mock with CATS. Jenna Nichols is our Deputy Project Manager. Ajnel Poole is our Public Information Officer and Communications Officer. She's the one who does all the outreach, and she's very important to the team. John Howard is our TOD Manager, that's Transit-Oriented Development, and that's looking at the land use around the stations, not so much the nuts and bolts of the station and the track, but the land use vision around it. And Jason Lawrence is our Rail Trail Project Manager, and he's putting forward a team that's seeking to develop a vision for a continuous rail trail that goes the entire length of the Silverline at the very beginning of the project. So just as a note, this project is really part of a much bigger puzzle of trying to pull a lot of things together to reach a one kind of more cohesive vision. And that includes all the jurisdictions and towns and municipalities along the alignment, including the town of Belmont, the city of Charlotte, the town of Matthews, the town of Stallings, and Indian Trail, and all of their planning organizations, such as the Gaston, Union, and Mecklenburg County MPOs. NCDOT, who has many projects that are being coordinated with the Silverline, as well as NCDOT owns most of the roads that the Silverline will go along or cross, so very important stakeholder. Within CATS, we also have significant outreach from a regional perspective, looking at how CATS can serve, or how other transit agencies can also serve transit in other more regional areas. So this Silverline works closely with the regional program to make sure that we're all coordinated as far as how the Silverline can serve those broader transit issues, as well as the 2030 system plan, which seeks to develop the corridors that we're actually pursuing with CATS. And as I said before, there's also components of this project directly within the program related to transit-oriented development and rail trail. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as the presentation goes on. So we'll just kind of get into our preliminary staff recommendations. This map you see, including the purple line, is our preliminary staff recommendation, and it goes 26 miles, including 30 light rail stations and one proposed maintenance facility. We have broke up the 26 miles up into 6 focus areas, and that was really just done as a way for the community and for ourselves to kind of drill down and focus in on a particular area because the Silverline is so large. So we've done Focus Area 1 and 2 earlier this week, and tonight we're on Focus Area 3. After Focus Area 3, which ends in Center City, we then go out Independence Boulevard for Focus Area 4. That meeting's next week. Out Independence Boulevard out to Conference Drive. Then we transition from Focus Area 5, which is the transition point from Independence to Monroe Road out to the town of Matthews. And Focus Area 6 is within Union County. But before we drill down into any details, and we will get into a little more zoomed in version of what those recommendations actually mean, maybe we keep it at a high level for a moment and kind of talk about the preliminary purpose of the project, or why are we pursuing this project. And so the purpose of the project, and this is all part of a general statement that we make through our environmental program to describe what the purpose and need of the project. And we presented this to our public at our public meeting round 2 back in September. I'll quickly go over that. So our preliminary purpose is to provide a competitive, reliable transit alternative to improve local connectivity and access to housing, employment, and community services along the corridor, promote opportunities for development, provide a transit system that's financially sustainable to build, operate, and maintain, and to preserve and protect the natural and built environment. Early scoping, which is a federal environmental process, it really comes in and takes an early look at very large, complex projects. We did that in the fall. As part of that, we did prepare and present the preliminary purpose and need for the project, and some of the stakeholders were some of the federal and state agencies who will do much of the permitting of the project. So it's very important to not only do the public face of it, but also do that agency component as well. There was a review of our previous studies, including the Southeast and the West Corridor studies that have been studied over the last 20 years. So that was part of this as well. There was a review of the alignment refinement options and potential station locations, where we received public and agency input on those. There was a review of any potential environmental concerns, and also the methods in which we were obtaining public engagement. And so that was one thing that was unique for this project, is really going into a virtual round, a very large virtual meeting. So that's something that we really kind of take some pride in, with how we've kind of adjusted how we usually do our business, because we usually like to be in the same room with people, standing over paper maps and answering questions. But we've had to completely change the way we do things, as many other people have. So that we felt like we've adjusted pretty well to the new way of doing things, and we received some good feedback on that. So getting into the public engagement and early scoping. So just as a kind of some statistics, we did receive about 800 comments in round 2. The top project priorities were local connectivity and travel time. So that was kind of the big thing that people, were really focused on, as far as the many different survey results. Nearly 90% of respondents agreed with the preliminary purpose and need. So that's good that there was good feedback on that. There was general support for the project within all the municipalities and jurisdictions. And 4 to 5 respondents thought we considered adequate amount of alternatives. However, there's always other ideas, and so we continue to evaluate those as they come in. So where we are as far as the project progression, we're in the pre-project development phase, or it's the very early part of design, really looking at what's a feasible alignment that we can get from Belmont to Indian Trail. Part of that is really looking into a lot more detail into that LPA refinement, taking the 2019 locally preferred alternative, or LPA, and really getting into a little more detail. Doing our early scoping, and then now taking that to the Metropolitan Transit Commission, or MTC, for adoption later on. Once we have an adopted, refined LPA, then we'll be able to begin a lot more of our more detailed environmental and engineering studies, as well as begin some of the more focused stationary planning work that will complement the stations, looking at land use improvements, capital improvements, other goals such as affordable housing and other things. Really will kind of kick off once we have an adopted alignment and there's more certainty about where the stations will be. Once we complete this first phase, pre-project development, we'll then we'll seek to enter into the project development phase, which is the formal federal funding pipeline. And that's where we complete our environmental process, and also our 65 or more detailed estimates and plans. So just to kind of talk about refining the alignment and kind of what that means. So the alignment that was adopted in 2019 was kind of a general corridor. It was kind of a broad or fat line. And it was basically saying that you got from Belmont to Center City via Wilkinson Boulevard, but it didn't get into a lot of detail for how you're going to do that. Is the alignment in the air? Is it below grade, or is it on the side? where exactly are the stations and where are the bridges. And it's one of the goals of this first phase of the project is to get into some of those details to understand what side of the road is the station or the alignment on. And so the way that we've done that is really break up the big line into many, many different alternative lines, which really summed up to about 100 different ways that we could get from, Belmont to Center City to Indian Trail. And kind of using some factors, really kind of broke those up into different ways that we could do that, then evaluated them and shortlisted them down to one preferred recommendation that we're presenting tonight. So I'll talk about that process for a moment, just make sure we folks understand kind of how we got there. So taking that big line and breaking up into the multiple lines, the way we kind of approach that is really looking at it on these kind of factors. And really, one of the big things that we really looked at is really a deep dive into more details on engineering and environmental review. And so we really dug deeper into this alignment than really has ever been done before, and really learned a lot about the potential alignment and the trade-offs that we might have with one alternative versus another. As part of that, there's also an evaluation of changes in the corridor, anything that could have been built over the last couple years. We want to make sure we understand them and figure out how the project needs to adjust or change to address those. These may be new buildings that have been built in the last couple years in the Southeast corridor, or some utility that's come to light. And so we want to take some time to really understand what's out there today. Public and agency input, very important for us to really get our heads around. That's what's been one of the major focuses of this first phase, really going through this very robust public process and really taking some time to get some agency input. Really wanted to, also take some time to coordinate with other plans. We talked a little bit about NCDOT and their many projects and their ownership of many of the roads. And so we want to make sure that we understood those projects well, and that NCDOT had the opportunity to coordinate with us as well as they really progress those projects, so that we could all move forward with the projects side by side. And then we really wanted to take a moment to learn some lessons from the Blue Line. Many folks from CATS have worked on the Blue Line, or within the city and NCDOT as well, have worked on the Blue Line for the last 20 years or so. So really want to kind of get together and really get our heads around, what worked out well and what would we change if we could do it over again, so we could bring those lessons to the Blue Line, to the Silver Line from the Blue Line. So once we kind of have the 100, we broke it up into 100 different lines. Now we have to take it down from 100 down to 1. And so the way that we've done that is really this evaluation of benefits and risks. So the benefits that we're seeking to increase or to maximize when we compare one alignment versus another is we want to maximize, we want to make sure that we have the best possible travel time or operational benefits, because everybody wants fast, reliable transit travel trip. We want good local connectivity, meaning you can get from your home to wherever you want to be via light rail, and maybe that's from your home to light rail as a pedestrian, or as a bicyclist, or as an auto driver to a park and ride, or a bus rider to a connection point. So all those things are very important to make sure that people can get from where they are to where they're going. And also then to maximize opportunities for development, or those secondary or enabled benefits, that there's great places that happen around stations. We want to make sure we're putting our best foot forward to set the stations and the system up for success in that way as well. All the while, we want to balance our risks, because we're putting forward a project that we'd like to implement. So we want to make sure that we're managing our costs, because we'll have to go through a competitive federal funding process, which will count every penny and go through a very deep review of our costs and as well as our operating costs. Environmental considerations, that's something that's always very important to us. As we go into the federal process, we have to go through an environmental review, and that looks at many different aspects of the environment, including natural environment and impacts to communities. So that's a very important thing for us to look at, and it's something we've done a lot of environmental screening on as well. And really wanted to take some time to make sure that coordination is key, because coordination can slow down the project or stop the project depending on on where we are and who we're coordinating with. So that's very important for us. So just as a kind of a quick kind of process, a quick process slide. So this is kind of just a simplified way of the way that we look at these things. So when we're comparing all these alignments against each other, if one alignment has the least risk and it also has the most benefit, if those two things are the same, then for the most part, that is going to be our recommendation. The low risk, the lower risk, most benefit option is going to be the one that we, for the most part, mostly pick for our preliminary staff recommendation. Those two things may not always be the same. So if that's true, if either it's the least risk also has the least benefit or vice versa, then the question is, does an option with greater benefits have acceptable risk? Meaning, are we willing to take the risk to achieve certain benefits? And so if that's true, so if the answer is yes, we would select the most benefit option with acceptable risk. And then we would seek to try to mitigate those risks or manage those risks as we go through the project moving forward. However, sometimes the risks are too great and we have to kind of maybe not chase those benefits because the risk could, delay the project or kill the project. So with that, in those cases, we would then select the least risk option. So that's just a little bit of process slide to kind of show you kind of some of the way we evaluate things. So to get into a little bit of the weeds, I'll take a moment to show a couple maps showing our detailed evaluation of the preliminary recommendation. So and also this map has been sent out, so we send this out publicly as part of a mailer. So most people hopefully have seen this map. If you're within a half mile of our alignment, we send out paper maps, and this has been our website. But just to give a little overview, the purple line is our preliminary recommendation. The yellow triangle with the exclamation mark up here indicates where there's a change in our recommendation from the previously adopted LPA. So we wanted to note that clearly where we're proposing a change. And then in the boxes, it kind of describes why that change is. If you see a gray line like this one right here, this shows an alignment or an alternative that was previously studied, but is no longer being recommended at this time. And these boxes show the kind of the primary decision zones or recommendation zones for the primary amount of work. You see in Uptown, we have two major areas where we've kind of have done some deep evaluation. And we have two changes in our recommendations. That's not to say we haven't been looking at these areas right here, Charlotte Gateway Station and Graham, those continue, but those haven't really changed at this point. And there's also, certainly there's a lot of more evaluation to be done about these alignments. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the map section. But just to kind of note that the two decision zones, the first decision zone is really this one over here, which is the previous locally preferred alternative, which shown in gray here, kind of came out as soon as we crossed Norfolk Southern, and then crossed over Moorhead, and then over 77 around the northern side of the interchange through Wesley Heights. And there was a station proposed at this location, and then came down and merged into Wilkinson Boulevard. So when we really started looking at these alternatives with our engineering and environmental screening, there's certainly a lot of concerns that were raised, primarily from an environmental perspective, and that was one of the big things, our considerations or factors in this area. In this area, in the Cedar Yards, there's a lot of historic properties that were concerning because of our environmental review. That's something that we have to be very cautious of. There's also there's a park in Greenland Parkland in this area as well. So there's certainly a lot of kind of environmental concerns in this area. And then across in this area in Wesley Heights, there's also a lot of floodplains and water features. Folks remember the flooding that occurred in the fall. That was right where this alignment and the station were. And so when we saw that on top of our other evaluation, really kind of raised a red flag for us about this alignment being kind of too risky from an environmental perspective. But it's not just that this is too risky. There's a lot to like about the purple line, which goes along the southern side of the interstate as well. And one thing is it's a more direct trip, so it's a faster trip. And so we'll be able to get people through on a more direct path to get people directly out to the airport or wherever they're going on the west side and vice versa. So there's some benefits there, certainly from an operational side as well. So that was kind of our rationale for adjusting or proposing the station or the alignment to be on the southern side. After we get out of this decision zone, we go either under or over Norfolk Southern. And the current thinking is we would bridge over Norfolk Southern and go from the west side to the east side with a station at Charlotte Gateway. And so we continue to coordinate and work with the Charlotte Gateway Station development team to ensure that both projects are well coordinated moving forward. And there'll be some public engagement on that in the future as those designs continue to gel. After Charlotte Gateway Station, we come along and down this way into the Graham Street area in 4th Ward. Question there is, are we going over Graham Street or under Graham Street? That's kind of an ongoing conversation. We're having some conversations with the community and the state regarding those options. At this point, we don't have a solid recommendation here for this until we do a little more public engagement with the 4th Ward community. And then really it's about how we get along 11th Street and out towards Independence Boulevard. And so some of our recommendations here are really kind of a couple changes in the way we think about things. Is we're looking to minimize cross street access. Our previous, and I'll show this in the map so it'll be a little more apparent, but the previous recommendation had a lot of cross streets crossing the light rail, and we thought it's too impactful from the community's perspective on traffic, as well as impactful on light rail operations on a day-to-day basis. So that's a proposed adjustment in our way of thinking. And it supports more reliable train traffic as well as traffic itself. One thing that we also are doing at this point is connecting the blue line to the silver line on a non-revenue connection, because we have to get vehicles between the blue line and the silver line for maintenance and day-to-day operations. So it's important for us to be able to make a connection point at this location, which allows us to connect to a maintenance facility that we're planning for the silver line and connect those to the blue line and the silver line maintenance facilities. So in this case, we're showing or proposing some adjustments to our previous thinking of this alignment. I mean, it's mostly in a vertical way, less of a horizontal way. So you don't see a big change here horizontally, but the things that are being talked about are more vertical in nature, meaning either the rail is either higher or higher or lower than we previously thought. So I'm going to take a couple minutes just to go through the map and just kind of show a little more with aerial photography and kind of show some of these things. So coming out, and I won't go into exhaustive detail, but because we spent a little bit of time on the last map, but coming out of the Norfolk Southern alignment or Norfolk Southern adjacent recommendation that we talked about last night, coming through and past the pipe and foundry site, which is actively being discussed and potentially redeveloped. With a station at Moorhead. The station would be elevated similar to the same elevation as the current Norfolk Southern bridge. So it would be a little bit elevated, maybe 20 or 24 feet above Morehead, but it would provide good direct service to Bank of America Stadium, as well as the many land uses that are being planned around Cedar Yards and Pipe and Foundry. Then at that point, the thinking is the light rail would go over Norfolk Southern from the west to the east and over, and then back down to a similar elevation as the Amtrak station in Charlotte Gateway Station. This area is all being part of the master development that's being discussed by the Charlotte Gateway team. Then come down between the railroad and Smith Street. This is where we're talking about bridging either over or under the Graham Street with a station in this general area. We're still working on the details, as I said, working with the community about the best way to configure this area. And maybe now might be a good time to pause and let Jason Lawrence kind of talk about some thoughts about rail trail in Uptown, and then we can kind of go on to the next slide after that.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, and as Andy's walked through some of the alignment option that's being recommended in Uptown, the rail trail team is evaluating how to make sure that there's a seamless pedestrian experience along the entire length of this project. And Uptown certainly provides us with a lot of opportunities with Cross Charlotte Trail just on the outside of Uptown, and then the Irwin Creek and Stewart Creek Greenways and kind of the Cedar Yards area. Some of the options that we're thinking about along here is certainly to coordinate with the Charlotte Gateway Station development to incorporate a rail trail in that master development, but also look at some opportunities to, if there are aerial sections along here, to potentially have the trail incorporated either underneath or adjacent to that in some kind of street form, and looking at opportunities to connect all the various parks in this area. So this is a critical piece for that overall rail trail component.
Great. So if we go to the next map, so this map kind of picking up on this Graham Street area, then, you know, one of the more challenging parts of the entire 26 miles is this really the stretch along 11th Street. And so the concept is 11th Street as it currently sits or, you know, operates today. The idea is that the Silver Line would rebuild 11th Street closer to I-277 and use that right of way or that space that 11th Street was on for light rail. So that's the idea. And so the challenge is managing all the cross street traffic. So there are 7 or 8 different cross streets which cross 11th Street. So we're in the process of evaluating the best way to do that, because we believe that it's important for light rail to kind of stay out of those cross streets as much as possible, given the traffic patterns of the street, the current street network, as well as how that would impact the Silver Line as well. So we're evaluating different vertical or aerial concepts or for how we might do that in this area. And one of the key destination points we're really trying to hit is this transition between the Silver Line and the Blue Line, the 9th Street station right here, the Blue Line, connecting to the 11th Street station that we're proposing, and how we would integrate both stations together in adjacent development as well. We certainly, the plan right now is to take the light rail over the Blue Line in some capacity. We're not sure exactly vertically how that works at this point, but we intend to go over the Blue Line, and then it's likely to stay up and elevated along the frontage along 11th Street, and then transition along First Ward over to the area near Central and Jackson. We are evaluating a couple different horizontal alternatives as well, which may come, you know, further down here closer to Central. But there's a lot of challenges to that. And so I'd say that the alignment, you know, is kind of still being evaluated mostly from a vertical perspective, or how high in the air the light rail is. I think it's likely that the alignment will be elevated along First Ward, and at least to the Blue Line, and then it may be elevated along this area as well. We are evaluating something that's more, you know, more of a cut section, but with a cut section, when I mean cut, meaning a trench, comes, you know, impacts of accessing those, a portal, or, you know, a transition point from at grade to underground. Also creates all kind of, you know, practical concerns about safety and operations and construction and risk. So there's a whole lot more to think about from an engineering perspective on this section between Graham and you know, Central Avenue. But that's kind of our current thinking. And so maybe let me zoom out of the kind of the nuts and bolts for a moment, and maybe kind of hand it to John Howard, who can take a moment to kind of talk about the transit development plan and kind of what's being discussed in this area.
Sure, thank you, Andy. And as he discussed earlier, there's a lot of activity going on in Uptown with the NCDOT projects. We've got on the eastern side, we have, northeastern side, we have residential developments in First Ward. We have an historic district in Fourth Ward. We also have, of course, the Charlotte Gateway Station and interface with Gold Line. And then on the western side, as you head into Wilkinson Boulevard, the alignment did shift. And last night we went into a lot of detail about the Norfolk Southern alignment and how we're not on Wilkinson Boulevard coming out of Uptown, but hugging Norfolk Southern and adjacent to them for about another 3 miles, and then cutting back into Wilkinson. So the western side's got mostly industrial and vacant property now. And the dots on the map really are not final. So during this process and station area planning process, we would refine the stations themselves. Some on this 26-mile alignment, if you will, are somewhat fixed, but others we're still pretty fluid. Looking at engineering criteria and also TOD type criteria. So how do you balance those two? Some stations in this area may shift. Some may be combined, especially in this western side where you see as we cut into the west side and we're adjacent to Norfolk Southern going through Charlottetown and Foundry. It could be a great advantage to a station in that location, being about a half mile from the Blue Line, Bland Street, and also near the Gold District in South End and Wilmore. So as we go along through the station area planning process, which would start, and I'll get in more detail about that in the fall, in the late spring, and go until maybe the late fall, early winter, we would do more station area planning with the public and finalize those station alignments. So with that, I'll jump into our next steps. So now we're in the public engagement process, the round 3 of our process for this part of the Silver Line planning effort. Then we'll step into early adoption with the MTC. So in March, staff will present a recommendation to the MTC for information. And then in April, we'll go back to the MTC for adoption of the alignment. And then lastly, we'll advance the light rail design and get into environmental review, preliminary design, and community engagement. As far as the TOD planning effort, that'll start, like I said, around late spring. We'll get into more of the station area planning effort. We'll start to align or define the rail trail a little bit more. And within that station area planning effort, the lessons learned from Blue Line and BLE is to kind of expand the study program to include more housing in terms of affordable housing, mixed income housing, and talk about displacement, which is it's a citywide issue, not just a light rail issue. And it's also a regional issue. We're actually connecting, of course, to other jurisdictions. So we'll have a very robust conversation about housing and about equity and access. And that's also being addressed in the comprehensive 2040 plan that the Charlotte Planning Department is working on too. So as far as displacement goes, it's really being addressed on different levels. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Andy to talk about the online open house.
Great, thank you, John. So just as a note for folks, because we went through a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. And so all the information that we present tonight is on our online open house. So if you go to www.ridetransit.org and go to the Silver Line tab, there'll be a link to what we call the online open house. All the information that we presented tonight is available to you there. And so I'll just briefly kind of go down through that. And we'll use one of the maps that's on there as a reference tonight because it's pretty effective for that. But it kind of goes through, you can kind of download and see the preliminary alignment maps, kind of where we stand as far as schedule and kind of those issues. And then going down a little further, it will show you all the preliminary recommendations on the same exhibits that we presented tonight. So if you're interested in Belmont or the airport or the town of Matthews, you can just kind of click through them here and kind of see what we're thinking about and what we intend to get input on. But this map is one area that's very popular because it's kind of a dynamic map of the alignment, the purple alignment, and the alignments that we previously evaluated on top of aerial photography. So I just clicked on this area, zoom into focus area 3, which we're talking about tonight, maximize, and you can kind of zoom in and pan around and think about things. If you get out of the meeting and you want to kind of think, what are they talking about? Where exactly is that purple line? You can kind of get a feel for what we're talking about as it relates to what's on the ground. There we go. And so maybe with that, I will before I do that, sorry about that. Before I kick it over to Ajanel for Q&A, we also have a survey that's available on the website as well. And so please come to the website and take our survey. You can also see the videos from the last 2 nights that are here as well. And we're also raffling off a gift card for folks who take the survey, so you'll be put in a raffle for gift cards. And so we really want your input, and that's kind of why we're taking that extra step. So I wanted to thank you for that. But now maybe I'll hand it over to Ajnal Poole, who will kind of facilitate our live Q&A.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you to everyone who is joining us this evening. As Andy said, my name is Ajnal Poole. I am the Community and Public Relations Specialist for CATS and also for the LYNX Silverline Project. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening as we talk about Focus Area 3. As Andy mentioned earlier, when we first began our outreach effort for this project, we had every intention of doing in-person public meetings, but actually we're able to do a couple of them in our round one outreach at the beginning of 2020. However, as everyone knows, we are currently in the middle of a pandemic, so we're trying to present this information in the most safest way possible. So we have to acknowledge that we understand it's not always the best way people like to engage with a project and receive information, but we do appreciate you guys still giving us feedback and joining us this evening. I also want to reiterate a few things Andy said about our Q&A session. We do have panelists with us from different departments and agencies that will be able to help us answer some of your questions. I want to ask our panelists to please stay on mute until you're answering your question. And if you do, please turn your camera on. I want to remind all of our attendees, if you would like to ask a question, and I do see we have some on YouTube already, to please log into your Gmail or your YouTube account and leave the question in the chat box on YouTube, and we will do our best to answer it in the time that we have left. I would suggest signing off of any VPN or organizational servers just for the best connection. We'll be answering the YouTube questions and also questions that we received prior via phone, mail, or email. Like I said, we'll try our best to get through all the questions this evening. If we do not get to your question, we will include it in a Q&A document, a frequently asked document that will go on our website. As a note, we are going to discuss Focus Area 3 tonight. And with that, I'm going to start our Q&A with a topic that we frequently get asked about, which John Howard kind of alluded to earlier, which talks about gentrification and resident displacement. So although light rail spurs immense economic development, it also comes with concerns of gentrification and resident displacement. John Howard, you mentioned the TOD study earlier. What are some ways that you in the study can address some of these concerns that folks have?
Thank you, Ajnal. So one of the things that we learned from Blue Line and Blue Line Extension is that, yes, we did get a lot of great economic development. We got a lot of market rate housing, but we didn't plan for that in advance. So with the Silver Line, we're being much more intentional about getting ahead of that. Even though we're getting affordable housing projects now, kind of after Blue Line BOD had been built, we want to think about that a little bit further in advance before the line gets built for Silver Line. So in our TOD study, we have a line item for housing studies as far as the strategy for getting more mixed income housing, more affordable housing within the Silver Line corridor. So we also expanded that to have more housing staff from the city and involving other partners around the region and the community who build affordable housing. And we also have consultants on board who have specialties in that field. So another thing to look at too is, the route that the Silver Line has taken along kind of the north side, going kind of past First Ward, Fourth Ward. One idea was to open up more development across 277. There's a lot of land, vacant land. There's a lot of industrial properties that may be outdated. That could be good candidates for affordable housing and mixed income housing. So that's another reason for having this housing study done in advance, is to figure out how we can kind of leverage this new alignment and to have more of that type of development along Silver Line in this section. And another piece of our housing research is, again, looking at displacement, again, not just for the Silver Line itself, but as I said earlier, citywide is the issue for all of us. And our housing staff has done a lot of research on this topic and again, as part of the 2040 comp plan. So it's not just a Silver Line topic that we're looking at, but more as an overall city strategy of how we address displacement.
And John,
Thank you, John. Oh, go ahead, Miles.
I'm sorry, yes, I was just gonna say John was spot on with regard to the response on affordable housing in particular there. One thing else worth noting is the fact that, again, lessons learned from the Blue Line is that by having the Housing and Neighborhood Services staff thoroughly connected with CADs, thoroughly connected with planning with regard to how we can best come up with this sound affordable housing strategy or anti-displacement strategy, is going to be instrumental as well, there, because there are a number of tools that we already have in our toolbox, such as anti-displacement, retail assistance, or residential assistance as well. That's going to play a key role in terms of how we address this issue along the Silver Line.
Thank you. And Miles, did you want to give your name and title to folks who might not know who you are?
I'm sorry, Jeanette, I didn't hear the last part.
I said you might want to give your name and title to folks who might not know who you are.
I'm sorry, my name is Miles Vaughn. I'm with the City's Department of Housing and Neighborhood Services. I manage the Housing Services Division.
Thank you. Another frequently questions that, and thank you, John and Miles. Some of the highlights of the LYNX Silver Line include the key connections it will provide. One of which will be the future Charlotte Gateway District. Jason and Lawrence, can you talk a little bit more about this project and what connections will be available at this station?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as we were doing the system update a few years ago, one of the key recommendations was for the Silver Line to serve the future Charlotte Gateway Station. It truly is where the Southeast Corridor and the West Corridor came together to be called a single project called the LYNX Silver Line that we're talking about today. And, you know, at the Charlotte Gateway Station is a mixed use development through a public-private partnership to relocate the Amtrak station that's on North Tryon Street today down to Uptown Charlotte. It'll also be a future hub for any type of commuter rail or passenger rail within the region. And also we'll have a bus station for intercity bus like Greyhound, but also for CATS facilities. And we'll have a future streetcar stop. And so the Silver Line will be able to access all those different types of services while being incorporated in a large mixed-use development.
Thank you, Jason. We're going to go to our YouTube questions now. First question, will there be a non-revenue line connection between Silver and Blue so the trains can be used on both lines? And I see either Andy or Jenna, do you want to take this one?
Sure. That's a great question. And for folks who don't know what non-revenue means, that's the track that is utilized to connect to, it's not used in service. Revenue connection is when you have the trains on track that passengers can get on. So the question is, will we have that non-revenue connection? And yes, that's very important to us to make sure we can connect our, the two alignments to one another so that we can access the rail yard facilities that we have along South Corridor and along the North Corridor, along the Blue Line extension and the original Blue Line. So that's an important piece for operational flexibility and for the ability for us to maintain the system. So that's definitely a component to determining how we get through this area.
Thank you, Jenna. Will there be an evaluation of the addition of sound barriers along Independence Boulevard where residential homes are located now without barriers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we get a lot of questions about noise. So what we'll be doing as part of an environmental review is doing a noise and vibration assessment of the impacts of the Silver Line. Part of that analysis will be an evaluation of what's it like today. So there'll be an existing conditions noise assessment to see how noisy it is today. And then we'll be evaluating if there's any contribution to the existing condition of noise with light rail. I will say that light rail is very quiet as compared to highway noise. So that will be something that, as we'll be looking at very carefully and cautiously. But I would just like to note, a lot of people get confused between like a freight railroad and light rail. Freight railroad is much louder and much longer, and the horns are much louder. So light rail is relatively quiet and is not as sustained, does not have as many horns.
And just to add to that too, we were taking a look at our previous study and for the Blue Line extension, and we were reminded that light rail, the decibel level is often, can be compared to that of an air conditioning unit. So just to put it in perspective, additionally, the dinging or the horn blowing happens often at grade crossings, and as we discussed, we'll be minimizing the grade crossings through the 11th Street corridor.
Thank you, Jenna and Andy. NCDOT has plans to update 277 on and off ramps along 11th. Will this be needed to be done to run the line along 11th? And Andy, I see Stuart Basham is with us. Stuart, you'd like to take that one?
Thank you, Ajanelle. I'll be glad to take that question. The Uptown Charlotte I-277 loop was constructed between 1981 and 1987. And in the 3+ decades that have since passed, the needs of the Uptown Charlotte area have changed tremendously as the area has grown. The connections that are needed now are vastly different from those that were created in the mid-1980s when the I-277 loop was first reconstructed. In a joint effort, coordinated effort between NCDOT and the City of Charlotte, in 2017, we began looking at a possible reconstruction of the I-277 loop around Charlotte, particularly in the area from South Boulevard around to Graham Street. The project involves a series of 3 different projects to reconstruct the loop, the first of which is funded in our 10-year transportation improvement program, and will be going to construction later in the decade. Over the last year and a half, there's been an extensive amount of coordination between NCDOT and CATS to figure out how the Silver Line and the I-277 reconstruction fit together and can coexist in the same corridor. So that issue has been addressed. The extensive coordination is ongoing, and we believe that we are able to achieve a route that will allow the 2 facilities to exist together without conflict and interact well.
Thank you, Stuart. Andy, did you? Thank you.
Oh, sounds great.
Okay. And Stuart's with NCDOT. Thank you. Andy, this is a good one for you. What is the objective of the NTC review?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the Metropolitan Transit Commission, they are the CATS governing board. They set the policies for that we follow as far as our day-to-day operations, and the also set the alignments in which we're pursuing for future and present and future capital projects. So really we're moving forward, the purpose of this Metropolitan Transit Commission review, and it's a reaction to what the MTC directed CAT staff to pursue in 2019, was really to pursue an engineering and environmental analysis and review of the locally preferred alternative 2019, and really come back with any adjustments that may need to be made once we do this more detailed review. Also, we are also directed to evaluate an alignment that goes into Union County. So the Metropolitan Transit Commission back in 2019 directed us to do some things. So our task is to kind of come back to the Metropolitan Transit Commission and present for information and for action or adoption any adjustments or changes to the locally preferred alternative for the Silver Line. So that's the purpose of why we're doing this initial MTC step.
Thank you, Andy. Another question. One of the stated goals is to minimize impact on existing structures. So why is the rail being built along 11th Street instead of 12th Street? 11th Street is literally right on top of First Ward.
Yeah, so we are trying to minimize those impacts on structures. We don't think we're going to have any direct impacts on residential structures along First or Fourth Ward as we currently have this defined the project. And so we are looking for ways to maybe pull the alignment a little further away from some of those residential structures in First and Fourth Ward. We have had some focused community meetings with the First Ward community and the Fourth Ward community, so we definitely heard some concerns, and we're evaluating some different ways to mitigate that. As it relates to 12th Street, that was evaluated, and a 12th Street alternative, that was evaluated as part of our system planning efforts. So we did a number of workshops about that. And it really kind of comes down to where one of the big goals of the project is to get to Charlotte Gateway. And it's really difficult to go from 12th to Charlotte Gateway after you get past the blue line. And so one of the goals is, also to be within the loop, be, in Center City, directly adjacent to all the activity and energy, and really kind of spur some additional development. So through the system planning process, there was a number of kind of initiatives and goals that led us to follow 11th Street instead of 12th. It's capturing the energy and also making it the gateway. And we feel like we're moving towards a direction of trying to minimize any direct impacts of the project on residential properties.
And sorry if you already said this, but it also improves that the transfer between Blue Line and Silver Line. You might have said that, Andy, but just to point that out, that we want to make sure that that's a premium connection as well.
Thank you, Jenna and Andy. This one could be for John Howard or Andy. What happened to the previously planned Wesley Heights station? Is it no longer planned?
Yeah, so I addressed that a little bit. It's probably me initially. So I addressed that in the overview presentation of our recommendations. And it really, it kind of comes down to an assessment of kind of some of the impacts of going through the Cedar Yards area, as well as the environmental impacts related to Irwin Creek and everything around Freedom Drive. So when we kind of looked at those environmental concerns in our screening, it caused a lot of concern. We have had some engagement with the Wesley Heights community. And based on some of the feedback, we feel like there's reasonable access to the Wesley Heights community to some of the other stations via Greenway trails and other routes to get to the Moorhead Station and or the Gold Line stations. So yeah, it's unfortunate for the Wesley Heights community that alignment had to be kind of reevaluated and rethought based on those environmental concerns. But based on what we heard, we feel like there's reasonable access to other modes of transit serving the Wesley Heights community.
Thank you, Andy. In the essence of time, I'm going to see if we can kind of group some of these questions together by theme. So there seems to be a lot of questions about what the 11th Street connection to the Blue Line would look like. There's a question about and then a question about how elevated it would be along 11th Street and in that area close to the residents in that area.
Yeah, so that's one of the big questions, is to determine how elevated it would be. So that's something we're actively evaluating. Is it a first level bridge, meaning it's at a similar elevation as the current 11th Street, or is it a level higher? And so that's one of the kind of the engineering analysis that we're in the process of working out with all the many stakeholders along the 11th Street area. So you could think about it like first level would be the Blue Line, and then second level would be the 11th Street elevation, and third level would be a level above that. So we're in that process of trying to figure out what's the best profile or vertical or elevated situation for the Silver Line to be as we cross, keeping in mind development goals, connectivity goals to the Silver Line, and general urban design goals for how we're trying to treat this area.
Thank you, Andy. How preliminary are these recommendations? Is it too late to listen to the concerns being raised?
No, it's certainly not too late to listen to the concerns from the community, not at all. We're trying to do a lot of focused outreach to kind of get ahead of those concerns. And so that's why we've had so much outreach to the 4th and 1st Ward communities, as well as many of the other communities up and down the alignment, but it's certainly not too early. I'd recommend putting any concerns or in our survey or send us an email, and Jenna will kind of give an overview for how you can provide direct outreach to us so we can kind of review them and evaluate your question or the concern and come up with a response. But certainly it is not too early to hear those. The time is right.
Thank you. As for the Graham Street station, are we planning on a pedestrian connection to the Music Factory / Greenville neighborhood?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. We have heard that as a desire. It seems like a slam dunk as far as a market goes, as far as You've got all these, these music venues over here. We know that the railroad crossing is closed at night, so there's an opportunity to provide a connection that really doesn't exist today. That's one of the kind of the perks of having an aerial station. If this ends up being on a bridge, that perhaps you can build a direct connection off and over. It's something, as we get into kind of the station area planning and infrastructure investment discussion, we'll evaluate whether we can make that connection work directly here off the bridge. And even if it's not an elevated guideway, you could still build a pedestrian bridge up and over. It's just another structure. So I think we recognize the market that's there, and I think we'll try to figure out the best way to deliver service to that market as we progress into design.
Thank you. Again, we're going to try to get through these last few questions as quickly as possible. It looks like the Silver Line will cross the Charlotte Trail around Central Ave/Independence. What kind of impacts will this line have on that trail during construction and after? And I don't know if Jason Lawrence might want to talk a little bit about rail trail and access and connection.
Yeah, we can pivot to that too. But I would say that we're actively trying to figure out how we can maintain access to the Cross Charlotte Trail. Right now we recognize it as an important facility that's just now under construction, and that might be an adjustment to the rail trail or to the Cross Charlotte during construction, or it might be some adjustment to it necessary to keep it active as best we're able to. So I think that's an ongoing conversation as we really progress in design and understand our profile and our design a little bit better, and to figure out how that relates to the Cross Charlotte Trail. So it's kind of a little bit of a work in progress right now. We know the facility's there. We provided comment on it through the design process. So we'll continue to coordinate with the team that's putting that forward to figure out the best way to progress the Silver Line along that corridor.
Thank you. Regarding the Silver Line along the Gateway Station, how will the light rail impact the new Amtrak station being built currently in Gateway?
So it will be adjacent to it. Will be parallel to it. So the Amtrak station will be more to the west, and the Silver Line will be kind of parallel with the station right next to it on the east side of the railroad right away. So it won't directly impact. It won't be on the same tracks in any way. So we will be separated but adjacent. So you'll be able to connect directly from the Silver Line to Amtrak, which is one of the big things we're trying to, that multimodal goal of what we're trying to accomplish in Gateway, as well as all the other things that Jason kind of identified as far as bus connectivity and Gold Line and all those other things.
Thank you. When this LPA was presented in the fall, a stop was shown near West Summit Ave, where Charlotte Pipe is. Can you provide some background as to why this was removed? Is there a potential it could return?
Yeah, so agree. We did have a station here, and I think that's an ongoing conversation as we kind of keep progressing with design, working with the broader community who's doing a lot of evaluation and planning here. There is the opportunity for a station to come in this area between Summit and 77. One of the real challenges that we really need to overcome is to make that station accessible. As kind of right now, it's very difficult to access the station as the current thinking. So, I think that if we can solve some of those access issues, the station is possible to add back. But we need to make sure that people can actually get there, or it's not a very good station. So I think we would want to keep working with the teams that are preparing the kind of the visions and the development goals of this area to determine the best way to serve that area with a station. And it might be here, or it might be right at Morehead if we can't solve some of those access issues.
Thank you, Andy. And this will be our last question for the night. Again, if we did not get to your question, make sure you check our website, ridetransit.org/linksilverline. We will answer the questions in the document provided. And the last question for the evening is, why not run the line underground from Graham Street Station to at least the first station beyond First Ward? Real cities have underground stations downtown.
So when we looked at, I mean, a lot of times we're cautious of underground alignments and stations. There's a lot of uncertainty and risk and cost associated with those. And so those are also, I mean, that's just a practical part of an underground or a trenched system. But to really get under the blue line forces you to be very deep. So to go from Graham Street and say go under Graham the whole way over here, you would have to be, very, very deep to get under the blue line, and then build all the vertical connections up. So I mean, I think that's some of the concerns and challenges with going basically a subterranean or tunneled alignment along the 11th Street corridor.
One thing to add too is as we change from being at street level to being below grade, we have to make that transition using what we call a portal, and that has additional walls and infrastructure. It's basically like a trench as you go down. That can be difficult to program and place make in an urban environment. It can create an additional barrier, and that's something that is not necessarily a great piece of infrastructure to have right in your vibrant uptown area. So that's another thing to consider too when going below grade, as well as the stations below grade are not necessarily desirable either. Not being New York City, there's there could be concerns about having the eyes on the street that help the community safety, community policing, and having folks and businesses and activity around your stations. Putting them below grade does present additional challenges with that.
And that's the end of our Q&A. If Jenna, you want to close us out for this evening?
Sure. So while Andy's pulling up our slide there with some contact information, I just want to say thank you all for spending the evening with us. We feel hopeful that you all learned some valuable information and that this was a good use of time. We would also like to hear from you. So I really want to emphasize to have you all take the time to take the survey. You can find it on our website at www.ridetransit.org/LYNX and you can also take it by texting Silverline to 704-461-4441. And as Andy mentioned earlier, we are giving away 5 $100 Visa gift cards for participation in the survey. Please enter for your chance to win. You can also send us an email at linksilverline@publicinput.com if you have additional comments that you didn't enter into the survey, or just questions, or just want to contact our team to ask for an additional neighborhood meeting or the like. You can also reach us at 704-336-7433, or you can call a voicemail line and leave comments at 704-461-4441 and then enter the code 6636. And as always, you can mail us snail mail at Charlotte Area Transit System, care of Marketing Department, 3200 South Boulevard, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28209. Our public commenting period closes on March 11th, so please be sure to check out our website and the survey prior to March 11th, but you can always contact us at the contact information provided. This is, it's really important to have community engagement, and we really do take your input seriously. It's critical to helping us make the right decisions for such a transformational, multi-generational project. And we want to make sure that your input is considered. So please stay tuned and stay involved. And you can always continue to visit our website for the public meeting information, downloadable materials, and links to associated websites. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to connecting and engaging with you moving forward.